3.
NBC Week. Opening week for shows on the Full Color Network. Don't miss the biggest week in television. NBC Week.
Do you prefer your entertainment to be of a quiet nature? Then by all means don't watch Hogan's Heroes. There's just too much going on.
See how the West was fun. Watch F Troop every week on ABC.
This fall, watch programs that are a choice, not an echo, on NET, National Educational Television.
Once the shows had faded out, critics took pen in hand to perform their seasonal act of genocide. Terence O'Flaherty, San Francisco Chronicle.
Television now finds itself in a tough spot because they have encouraged mediocrity, and they've got it. And they've got the audience, which is worse. They've got the audience that is undemanding, the audience that will take mediocrity without a question.
Critic Bill Greeley, Variety.
I did my own survey, upon which I based a story in Variety, and I had various people. They all happened to be TV executives themselves. They labeled it a pulp grind, a comic strip, a supermarket, and one called it just plain garbage.
Critic Percy Shane, Boston Globe.
Television is moving toward infantilism so fast that soon the 4-year-old viewer may be the norm they are shooting for. It used to be the 12-year-old. Last year it was on about an 8-year-old level. And now with Batman and a whole slew of comic strips that will follow in its wake, maybe the standard will be halved again.
No cows were held to be sacred, not even educational television. Larry Laurent, Washington Post.
One of the problems with NET has been a lack of money, naturally, and the second fault has been the tendency to go wide with great big problems, to avoid the specific aspects of the problem and to suggest solutions for those problems. The generalized studies seem to get nowhere, really, except to give you some idea about what the problem is, not how to deal with it, not how to solve it.
National Educational Television presents At Issue, a commentary on events, people, and ideas. At Issue this month, what's happening to television?
It is the end of another long day in Big Sur, Roanoke, Brattleboro, and Brooklyn. You name the city, you name the town. On this ordinary, passive evening, very few are reflecting on the classic struggles of life and death and the enemy within us. Rather, we're reflecting upon Hogan's Heroes, the Beverly Hillbillies, and the Dean Martin Show. According to the audience rating services, more than 35 million people across this land on this weekday night are watching an average of 3½ hours of television. It is a habit which has been virtually unbreakable ever since 1948 or so, when television meant Tuesday night with Milton Berle.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, introducing America's #1 television star, who just returned from California, Milton Berle. Down, Lassie, down.
In its almost 20 years of life, the medium once affectionately known as the fabulous infant has transmitted millions of hours of images, some of them noble or lovable in profile, such as Uncle Milty, most of them faceless and forgettable. But is it truly fair to so indict television? In an age that has produced both the Cold War and the peptic ulcer, was TV ever intended to be anything more than an entertainment medium, a vehicle of escape? How often was its original purpose also to educate, elevate, ennoble a public? Let us hear a man who speaks for the medium, a man who, in more storied times, once spanked it to life. The 1939 New York World's Fair. General David Sarnoff introduces a new art form called television.
It is with a feeling of humbleness that I come to this moment of announcing the birth in this country of a new art so important in its implications that it is bound to affect all society. It is an art which shines like a torch of hope in a troubled world. It is a creative force which we must learn to utilize for the benefit of all mankind. In dedicating this RCA building as the birthplace of a new American art and industry, we have in mind the conception of a great service which will benefit our social and economic life and the national ideals of our people.
On how many nights has television lived up to such a splendid promise? This is the core of the controversy today. One important not only because it affects the programs we watch, but the airwaves we own. The airwaves, we sometimes forget, are public property. 40 years ago, the Federal Communications Commission was established as a kindred spirit over our television antennas to ensure that broadcasters respect the public's interest, convenience, and necessity. In the course of this program, we will examine how well that interest is being served. 1966. The critics say that along the new television alley, 6th Avenue, enormous power is breeding enormous arrogance. The battle cry of television executives, according to a Variety story, is a quote by a network man who says, "Since we licked Newton Minnow, we couldn't care less." At the new offices of the American Broadcasting Company, the Columbia Broadcasting System, and the National Broadcasting Company, gross revenues are up to nearly $2 billion. The broadcasting business has never been better. NBC Chairman Robert Sarnoff is once to have said, "If we listened to the eggheads, we'd be out of business in 6 months." For the current season, network prime-time evening schedules show 72.5 hours a week of situation comedy, adventure, and spy episodes versus a solitary hour a week of regularly scheduled public affairs.
Traces of radioactivity found among Spanish police looking
This is beyond newscasts or infrequent specials, and beyond the Sunday ghetto where most public affairs shows are now buried. One educator implies this is as it should be, claiming that more than half of America's adults cannot read above the 5th grade level anyhow. If this is true, that still leaves a sizable audience which can. What about them? Who programs for these families? The question must be asked. Doesn't television also have an obligation to meet their needs and raise others' perceptions? John Schneider, Group Vice President, Broadcasting, CBS. How does he regard TV and his role in it?
I think we're in a commercial art form. And as such, operating this commercial art form in a cultural democracy, which I think we have to grant these United States being, then I would like to have most people. I would like to be the most popular. I'd like to have the attention of most people looking at my network, because that's an honorable goal. I want to be best. I want to strive to be best. I want to be more popular. Now, if I say to the public, I don't really care whether you look at me or not, I don't see how their interest is served with that attitude. I think it's important that I want to be best, that I'm competitive. I want to be in first place. When the report cards are issued, I want to get an A. And as long as I'm striving for an A, then the public is served. If I only strive for a C, I don't know who's served by that. I'm mediocre, and the public isn't getting the maximum. If I'm second, I want to be first, and if I'm third, or fourth, or fifth, I'm darn ashamed of myself. I want to be better, and I want to stimulate the people I work with to be better, to be more popular.
What should television ideally be? And what obligations does Mr. Schneider have to the viewer?
Well, I think the television programming should be looked on as a mix. I think there is the head of the household acquired a television set for his home as an entertainment medium. He bought it to be entertained. And primarily, I think it's our job to entertain him. Incidentally, he, maybe as a byproduct, maybe subconsciously, maybe accidentally, he wants to be informed, and we inform him. We inform him in many, many ways. We inform him clearly in news and weather and sport and information programs designed to inform. But we also inform him and his family in programs like Captain Kangaroo. We inform him in many ways in a program like Password.
Across the street at ABC, President Tom Moore defined his obligation to minority programming needs this way.
We are in a development stage of television and have been since our very inception. We are adolescents. We have not reached a maturity, and it will take a long time for us to do so. But we have come a long way in our programming, and it has changed. But as we get into the second set in the home, as we get into entire color programming, as we get into deeper research into audience composition, it will become necessary to know more about our audiences, and if we have enough facilities that would support more than 3 choices in most television markets, I think that there will be a tendency for us to program, or some members of our industry to program toward minority groups. But I think that's some distance away.
Critics often fondly allude to the 1950s as the golden age of television. John Schneider disagrees.
The golden age is perfectly dreadful. Some of the things that were done in television in the alleged golden age simply wouldn't stand up today. Programs go off the air because they fail. Studio One was not popular, and then it went off the air. And Playhouse 90 was not popular, and it went off the air. It didn't go off the air because it was successful. Our goal is to have a successful program, to have a popular program. The critics have been terribly short-memoried, if you will, because Playhouse 90 was on every week, and we found that the creative well ran dry, so it went on every other week in an effort to keep it on. When that failed, we tried to keep it on as a special, as an approximately once a month. We irregularly programmed it the following year. We tried to keep Playhouse 90 on. We couldn't get material. And I must say, if this program had the time, and unfortunately it doesn't, I would be delighted to read some of the old criticisms that these very critics now say, give me back the wonderful Playhouse 90. They wrapped it and wrapped it and wrapped it and drove it off the air, along with the lack of audience.
But zoons, what's this all about?
Worthington Minor, the celebrated former producer of Studio One, takes quite another view of who killed drama. Today, as president of the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, he works with young actors and on occasion answers questions about television's era of live drama.
What do you say? Okay.
How and why did Studio One end?
How and why did it end? Oh, it's a very simple thing. Up until the time when I left and went over to NBC, the control of that program was entirely in the hands of the network. The moment the advertising agency got control of that program, it began immediately to go downhill and never stopped until it just disappeared. And clear evidence of the fact that what they believed was going to increase the appeal and increase the rating of the show turned out to be a cumulative disaster. And I think this happened to a good many shows for different circumstances, not perhaps the fact that a person left as I did, but the fact that advertising agencies put the screws on and got their hands in the control. And at that point, programming began to decline in quality and in excitement.
The public likes television the way it is, says John Warwick of Warwick and Legler Advertising. It's good for business, which means it's good for everyone. Critic Terence O'Flaherty thinks otherwise.
The role of commercial TV is to sell products. And I think if we forget that for 1 minute, we've forgotten the important thing. It is to sell products. And that's what the networks are interested in. That's what the sponsor is interested in. That's what everybody on the other side of the camera is concerned with. Well, its ideal role, to provide entertainment, I suppose, but there again, entertainment with some substance. But they've set, the terrible thing there, they have set mediocrity because as their ideal, because they're selling products. They want the lowest common denominator.
Dick Pinkham, Ted Bates Agency, TV billing $136 million.
That's a very familiar point of view, I think. And of course, the objective of television is not to sell products. The objective of television, from the point of view of the television people, is to put on programs which will be attractive to advertisers so that they can sell products. From the point of view of the advertiser, of course, it is to buy programs which will sell products, but that's not television's objective. As far as the lowest common denominator is concerned, that's one of those wonderful catchphrases with which the intellectual tends to demean the taste of the American public. And by the same token, you could say that successful movies are programmed for the lowest common denominator, successful books, successful magazines. Any mass medium obviously has to appeal to as many people as possible.
The greatest suspense stories in television are found not in the spy episodes, but in the twice-monthly rating reports. These critically affect 3 men who've been responsible for selecting most of the programs now on television. Mort Werner, NBC, Ed Sherrick, ABC, and at CBS, screening a program that found favor among the critics but not atop the rating charts, CBS programming executive Mike Dan.
You quite often are governed by what you think will be popular with most of the people. That's a basic entertainment or show business motivation, something that you think will be a hit. Now, what you really want to do is combine something you think is a hit at the same time doing something that you think points up or is of quality, if possible.
How many of the programs that Mike Dan chose for CBS this season were to his taste?
I do not personally think most programs on the CBS television network are to my taste. But that goes for most books, for most newspapers, and for most magazines. They're not to my taste. I have some favorites. I have 5 or 6 favorites, which I look at very regularly, and I look at the others for professional reasons. But I do not look on the basis of enjoyment or for information or communications from the medium itself to most programs.
F Troop was picked by programming head Ed Sherrick. Though he left April 1st for independent production, ABC says his statements still speak for the network.
We program 7 nights a week from 7:30 till 11 o'clock. Our needs are, again, in my area specifically, because I work in conjunction with news, with public affairs, our needs are to provide the most variegated entertainment schedule our talents and the creative talents of the people we work with will allow. We have operated against a maxim in evaluating every program. That maxim is, does it contain a touch of singularity?
How many of his recommendations did he personally enjoy?
Well, if they're done well, I enjoy all of them. I may not select naturally all of them to view, but as far as liking shows that go on the air, I think it would be suicide to put any show on the air you did not like.
Mort Werner of NBC reduces the complex design for survival to this.
We discuss our overall strategy. We look at our competition. We program against other networks. We select the programs we think have the best organized staff and the best possibility of doing well. In some cases, we go after high ratings. In some cases, we know we're not going to get high ratings. But the program department makes its recommendation, and it's either approved or disapproved. It is generally approved.
Far from the entertainment side of programming, standing on a plateau where the air is allegedly purer, are the news and public affairs departments of commercial television. What's happening to this kind of television? It appears that while straight news coverage has had an ambitious increase in terms of expanded nightly and weekend newscasts, there's been a parallel shortage in the area of hard analysis. It has been charged that coverage of Vietnam and other major issues have failed to provide insight and perspective. That documentaries seldom if ever take a point of view, and that most non-fiction programs are so vacuous, they've become mere extensions of evening fun shows. In February, these issues were joined in an historic clash between the imperatives of entertainment and information. CBS News President Fred Friendly resigned when John Schneider, who oversees the network, ran I Love Lucy rather than the Senate hearings on Vietnam. Mr. Schneider said the housewives wouldn't be interested, that the public would be better served by a 20-minute summary later that evening. Said Friendly in his resignation letter, the decision not to carry the hearings was a business, not a news judgment. Mr. Friendly took issue with Mr. Schneider's argument that the housewife wouldn't be interested. Referring to the network which that day covered the Vietnam hearings, he asked, why were NBC's housewives interested? He then quoted this from a speech made by Ed Murrow back in 1958, which he said spelled it all out. One of the basic troubles with television news is that it has grown up as an incompatible combination of show business, advertising, and news. When you get all three under one roof, said Murrow, the dust never settles. The dissatisfaction extends to such critics as John Horn, who is troubled with the lack of analysis on many issues, especially Vietnam. He writes, there's something radically wrong when television cannot find more times and ways to explain and discuss a war that can escalate to World War III. Walter Cronkite.
I got quite upset over the criticism of it. I don't know what we could do more than what we're doing. Some of that we're doing we might do better, yes. We have certainly exposed as deeply as we can the arguments for and against Vietnamese involvement with our documentaries and our daily programs, the statements from the Secretary of State, from the President, from the Secretary of Defense, and from those who are opposed to the war effort. I don't see where this criticism comes from or why. I suspect that why we get this criticism of the Vietnam War stems from the fact that we're all confused about this war. And we in television cannot make up the answer to the Vietnam War. We can only reflect the confusion. And when we do, those critics who watch and criticize themselves are confused and blame us for not throwing the spotlight on the answers when there aren't any answers.
Some of the critics are within television. During a speech made last October, Howard K. Smith of ABC News said he was troubled by television's present definition of objectivity.
Objectivity does not mean what present documentarians think it means. That is, balancing each thought or statement with its opposite. If you find a man who says the world's round, you've got to find somebody who will say it's flat. There's a magazine, a famous magazine in the 1930s, which was accused of being anti-Semitic, and it defended itself and its objectivity by saying, look at our last year's output. For every 15 anti-Semitic pieces we did 15 that weren't. Ladies and gentlemen, that brand of objectivity is really simply a respectable name for playing it safe. With each factor view that is presented, canceled out by its opposite, the documentary ends with meaning vanished, like the Wicked Witch of the West, and just a puff of nothing left at the end of the program. The programs are, as a result, uninformative. They are exceedingly dull, and the public finds it possible to look away in millions. I was a judge for the finals of the Emmy Awards this year. I sat through 6 solid of watching what were called documentary programs. They were all extremely elaborate, in beautiful color. They must have cost each a fortune to produce. But not one dealt with the untidy but fascinating world we live in. Most were a good 2 or 3 centuries away from the present time. I protested that I was given no documentaries to judge, and I was a newsman. I was told there aren't any. I could cite innumerable examples of the kind of documentary I'm talking about. CBS's documentary on TV ratings was a careful mutual cancellation of facts and views, signifying in the end nothing. My network mass produces that kind of documentary. NBC recently displayed the typical reaction of a declining form of expression. It sought to meet what is really a question of quality by heaping on quantity. Just as the movies tried to meet their problem by making the screen 3 times as big without changing the story, NBC made its documentary 3 times as long without improving the quality. Truly, you can say of documentary reporting on television what Mark Twain said of Christianity. It's fine. The only thing wrong with it is nobody practices it.
Well, with all due respect to my esteemed colleague, Howard, I happen to think he's just absolutely wrong. I think that the proof is in the documentaries we have done. We have not pulled punches. We haven't gone through the process of self-cancellation through objectivity. Objectivity, I think, is not a bad word, and I do not decry its use or its the goal of objectivity. But I do feel that that he's simply wrong in the criticism. Our show on cigarettes, on the Ku Klux Klan, there's just recent examples, abortion, and political issues themselves. We don't. I don't think that we self-cancel.
The New York headquarters of NBC News, which bills itself as the world's largest broadcast news organization. Vice President Reuven Frank.
I know.
His credits include the documentary The Tunnel and stewardship of the Huntley-Brinkley Report. In response to Howard K. Smith, Mr. Frank feels objectivity is a useless word. He prefers responsibility. He was asked, should documentaries take a point of view?
The film can't take a point of view. The editing might. The commentator, of course, can. If there's something he thinks he ought to say, and if he's one of those guys who has a license to say it, this is another thing. There are thousands of people on television. You want them all blatting their opinions? How about some facts? I think he ought to.
How often do NBC newsmen editorialize?
Brinkley does it very rarely. Huntley does it a little oftener. But I think if they did it all the time, they, of course, you wear the tolerance of the audience. They're not always looking for an editorial page. Television, at its best, is a narrative medium. Television does one thing that no other medium can. It transmits experience. It tells people how a situation feels. Television has, because everybody watches it, a responsibility to cover stories, to air discussions that is not ideally suited for, perhaps. But, coming back to Smith and objectivity, he is stating objectively a highly subjective view. He would like to be able to say more. Maybe he ought to, but that's not an argument about objectivity in documentaries.
But many hold it is the heart of the argument. They charge that when it comes to hard commentary, analysis, or interpretation, we are indeed in an era of no-guts journalism. In fairness, it should be noted that this season has seen a new program development, the Public Affairs Game Show, which threatens to test everything in sight, including our patience. Critics bemoan the lack of hard, sustained analysis on television today. Said Jack Gould, we deserve assessment in the tradition of such giants as Elmer Davis and Ed Murrow.
The Russian demand that British troops be withdrawn from Greece is only a move in the propaganda campaign against the British.
1933's unemployment, September at Munich, December 7th at Pearl Harbor, 9/15 over Hiroshima, were all part of the identical moment.
What's happening to television? The machine has succeeded human judgment. Odometers and transponders and data processors, the sterile hardware of the rating services, now make programming decisions. Through an electronic vaudeville act, the ratings purport to tell us how many Americans are watching a given entertainment or news show. This in turn affects the egos and pocketbooks of those in the industry, as well as the programs that appear or vanish on our sets. The major rating service is the Arthur C. Nielsen Company. Every 2 weeks, by means of a gadget attached to the samples the viewing habits of 1,100 families, claiming this represents the choice of 55 million families. Networks and ad agencies then read the charts and act accordingly. Arthur C. Nielsen, Jr.
Well, we must remember that television is a commercial system, as we know it in the United States. And when the networks use ratings, they are really, I think, doing quite a service to the public by finding out the types of programs which the public really enjoys, what they like and what they don't like. As far as our company goes, we take no position on this matter. Our function is merely to count the box office.
Professor Herbert Arkin, the City College of New York, has published many studies on ratings.
In a recent study undertaken by the Oklahoma State University was later printed in the Journal of Advertising Research, in which a camera was attached to television sets for a small sample of families. It was found that 19% of the time there was no one watching the television set at all, while for an additional 21% of the time, while there were people in the room, they were inattentive and not watching the set. As for a total of 40% of the time, nobody was watching.
Might say our ratings are analogous to the ticket taker at the box office. We tell how many people actually viewed a particular program, and the decision as to whether that will be left on or taken off is up to others.
While there's some comparison between counting the box office and publishing ratings, the analogy is not a very close one. In the box office, we get a 100% account of those people who actually paid money to attend a performance. In the case of the ratings which are published currently through the use of electronic devices, all we know is the number of sets that were turned on among a sample of people. We have no idea whether or not they viewed the set, they viewed the programs, or had any interest in them whatsoever.
It's not an honest box office.
Bill Greeley.
I'm sure that there's tremendous viewing of virtually everything. Those Hollywood sausages are beautifully made, and the average citizen can sit there and be mesmerized. But when the entire industry is focused on a sampling of 1,000 out of 55 million, it just is not a true box office, and it creates a fantastic hysteria. Has nothing at all to do with the quality of the show. The network really isn't interested in whether it's just a crap game, or whether it's a magnificent, beautiful documentary, or what. If it doesn't get those numbers, forget it.
Another criticism, beyond the ratings' shaky scientific ground, is that networks misuse the charts to take off good programs, leave on poor ones. Numbers count. So do superlatives. The New York Times, 2 ads, same day. In their race to be first, 2 networks find themselves drinking from the same cup of euphoria at the same time.
The network atmosphere is charged when the ratings come out. It's beautiful to see. They should have such a melodrama on the screen. Would that get a rating? Boy, yeah, the phone rings at Variety, and the 2 losing networks are copying their plea. You can't believe it. We got one from a network recently. They called up and said, we lost on account of Halloween.
I think ratings have a real function.
Mike Dan, CBS.
Just as the circulation reports for a newspaper or the book sales numbers by bookstores. We are a financially supported medium that comes from private enterprise who underwrite most of our bills. They have every right to expect and to know how many people are being serviced to move their goods and services. And the ratings is a very good way. The thing we mustn't do is determine everything we do by ratings. But they certainly have a genuine function, and I think are going to be here always.
While programmers deny that ratings significantly affect their decisions, it should be noted that 30 of this season's poorest rated shows will not be seen next year. Though various factors may have influenced their fate, all share one position in common: the bottom of the rating chart. ABC President Tom Moore says he's fed up with the use of average ratings.
But I think the fault comes in our averaging the ratings and saying that ABC is at this position this week, NBC is at this position this week, and CBS is at this position. Because I think such figures are meaningless. I know they're meaningless. But to the public and to the people who invest in and back us in stock buying, they seem to be out of proportion in interest. I think that we must find some way in our industry to be more cautious in our use of ratings, and I believe that there's a consciousness of this spreading through the top of our industry. I hope that ratings in the future will be less of a factor.
Industry observers and the FCC, which is investigating ratings, will now look to Mr. Moore to implement his words with action, to stop making program decisions using figures he himself has called meaningless. In the ratings race, the writer is all too often a willing victim, accepting handsome commissions to create material that deprives both the viewer and himself. Rod Serling says the networks are to blame because they insist on the writer giving them pap. Then why does he write for TV?
Number one, the money belt, and number two, the more amorphous area of creatively satisfying. Certainly it has been a windfall and a godsend to the so-called, quote, young writer, unquote, to begin with. Most of us would never have had a platform, no proscenium at all. We would have probably agencies, done civic theater plays in small towns, or coached football teams. Through the good offices of television, we not only made a living, but we became known, and we became relatively wealthy. So it's difficult to predatorily bite the hand that feeds without being cognizant, or at least paying some kind of lip service indeed to the fact that television has been very good to us. But in terms of what it does emotionally under the gut of the man who wants to create, this isn't the platform anymore. To the man with a serious idea, commentative on the problems of our times, the legitimate conflicts between human beings, I don't think really that television is the proper place for him to take his idea.
The Hollywood sound stages, where most television episodes are made. It has been called the dream dump, the refuse heap for all the broken, marked down furniture of good intentions. Here, where shows are as conformist and as predictable as the neat white shacks in which they are produced, work is going on toward the new television season for the fall of 1966. Just below us, as a tourist guide might intone, a take is about to begin on Paramount Soundstage number 2.
Here we go. Local lady.
And overlap in there.
Okay, very quiet, please. Roll, please. 38, 2. And I'm here for the look. Action.
This pilot, The Hero, a David Susskind Talent Associates production, has already been sold to NBC for the fall. NBC will also debut The Girl from U.N.C.L.E., Tarzan, and a comedy about a rock and roll group called The Monkees.
What's the matter?
What do you mean, what's the matter?
I can tell by your eyes something's happened. What's the matter?
Nothing's the matter. Hey, come on, don't start with my eye.
Among the new shows CBS will offer are dramatic specials, Operation Jericho, a World War II espionage series, and a situation comedy about an astronaut called It's About Time.
Got it. All right, boys.
ABC's new shows will include Stage 66, which they describe as a weekly hour of innovation, Rat Patrol, The Time Tunnel, and The Green Hornet. While it would be unfair to prejudge next season's new programs, there is no clear evidence that television 66-67 will be markedly different from today's programming.
Everybody? I'll have a new setup and give me 42 on the crew.
42 on the crew, 1 on the cast, 280. 45 on the crew.
What then does all this add up to? It adds up to most of television being so deplorable that even the ad man is dismayed.
I would say this.
Dick Pinkham, Ted Bates Agency.
The main problem for my money right now is that the direction, the thrust of television programming is counter to the mainstream of the thrust of American society. We are, after all, increasingly an educated nation. We've made tremendous strides, and more people are getting more and more educated through secondary school, through college, and into postgraduate work. And yet, television, the direction it's going now, with programs like Batman, which is a big hit, is exactly counter to this. It is going more towards the people who haven't had the experience of an excellent education. I think this is a sickness for television, and it should be corrected.
I doubt if television really will ever change. I think basically we're fighting a losing battle. Those of us who keep claiming that it's an art form. Indeed, it can be an art form. Indeed, on odd occasions, it is an art form. But I suppose principally, basically, fundamentally, it's a commercial medium designed as a display case to push products. And so long as it fits into that mold and performs that function, the key approach that's going to be taken, and the most basic approach, is get as many people to watch as you can and program down to that level, that arithmetical level. And as long as you program down to that level, you're not going to get properly balanced programming. You're going to get only those shows which appeal to the greatest number. And as in the history of art since for 2,000 years, beyond Sophocles, beyond all of them, you're going to get mass entertainment, which by its nature can be titillating and funny and cute and frothy and light, which will not survive its 1/2 hour on the air. Nobody's going to be talking about that 100 years from now.
The Office of the Federal Communications Commission. E. William Henry, Chairman.
What troubles me is the truth that I see in the rising tide of criticism that the commercial medium is now receiving. And it's receiving it from people other than the government, by and large, from me or my colleagues. I think, as I say, this criticism is true, and I think it's widespread, and I think it's deep. It's not limited only to the critics in the major cities. It's noticeable in the letters that I get from people who like television and who want to look at it, but who are tremendously dissatisfied with this season's show.
What did the commissioner feel would happen if television didn't improve?
I believe that if television entertainment mass appeal programming continued as it is now, it would fall of its own weight. The television people might wake up one morning and find they were talking to themselves.
Some critics say one alternative could be educational television. NET produces shows for over 100 affiliates. It is headquartered in New York. President John White's responsibility is using grants from foundations, government, business, and individuals for programming that hopefully is not an echo of commercial television. Among the critics who fought for educational television and thus regarded as a growing, sometimes wayward child, is the Washington Post's Larry Laurent. He feels NET often ranges too wide in its documentaries, touching on problems without offering solutions.
Fact is that the producers for NET are under specific instructions to do just the opposite. They're told to dig deep and to suggest solutions. I mean, our programs in foreign affairs, our programs in education, our programs on values, on packaging, on auto safety, each and every one of these has suggested solutions that we believe that the American people ought to seek. This is, in fact, one of the things that we do that's different from commercial television, because they don't do this and we do it.
Terence O'Flaherty, San Francisco Chronicle, believes NET has some distance to go, especially in its production techniques.
Now, National Educational Television, they're going to have to do something better than classroom television at night. I don't care how sophisticated one viewer might be. He doesn't want to watch a lecture.
Well, on the question of production values, I quite agree. I think, frankly, that we've made giant strides in improving our production techniques, but I'd also be the very first to maintain that we've only just started and we've got to go much further. If he is specific in his suggestion about lectures, he's watching a different network. Because the fact is that we got away from professors in front of gray draperies a long time ago. If, on the other hand, he means that we are suggesting alternatives and we are, in a sense, preaching at people, we'll never escape this because, as I indicated earlier, I think this is one of our responsibilities.
Beyond the potential alternative of NET, does Larry Laurent feel we must be forever hung up in commercial television's status quo?
Hell no, the battle is only beginning. And I think we're going to see some changes in this business in the next 10 years that will make what we now see on television look like sort of a primeval age. We're going to have more stations, we're going to have diverse stations, we're going to have specialized stations. This of its nature will force the business as it exists to change.
One of the changes becoming visible nationally is UHF, ultra-high frequency stations like Channel 32 Chicago. Here, WFLD is building both a plant and programming, which in the words of its general manager, Red Quinlan, will come to mean
an adult station from 6 to midnight, not programming to teenagers, heavy emphasis on documentaries, adult program, particularly in the 6:30 to 8 period, when I note that conceptually the network programs, Batman is a great instance of the trend in that direction. The teenage audience gives that a great inflated total share of audience. We will not have most network reruns. We will have a Profiles in Courage. We will have a Richard Boone Repertory Theater. We will have certain documentaries that we can buy from networks and other sources all around the world, but we'll be adult.
One unique feature of this Marshall Field-owned UHF station will be live news coverage from the city rooms of the Chicago Sun-Times and Daily News. Automatic slave cameras, remote-controlled, will transmit fast-breaking stories that will be edited and read on camera by working newsmen.
We're not going to be locked into a numbers game or a rating game. If we get them, we'll be happy and we'll use them. If we don't, we'll still make it our own way as best we can.
In London, another solution to America's TV problems is offered by a man who has written some of the medium's most constructive criticism. John Crosby, formerly of the New York Herald Tribune, and now writing in England, tells from where he thinks the impetus for improvement must come.
I think it would have to come from the government. I've never altered my conviction that this is a government responsibility, whereas the government's almost afraid to step into it. And yet, here you have BBC, which is supposed to be government, really isn't. It's almost above the British government. The British government's almost terrified. Well, you get this tremendous experimentation, very gutsy program. Sometimes I say it doesn't work, but they have a freedom that, well, that even the commercials. I think I would love to see a government network in the United States. Have one government network and two commercial networks, and I think they would both be very good for each other.
Television, first of all, the system of television that we have in this country, I think is the best in the world because it combines a commercial system with a non-commercial system. And unquestionably, in my mind, this will give you the best choice.
One man is not so sure the best choice is that easily available. Pat Weaver is a former president of NBC and head of a pay TV network. He feels that there is a broadcast lobby which restricts the viewer's free choice.
The broadcast lobby, though, is also well known to be tremendously powerful. This is because so many congressional people in Congress, senators and congressmen, either have or represent in their law firms other interests, that is, broadcasting interests and theater interests, and this is most unfortunate. The present work, for instance, of the broadcast lobby to block CATV, community antenna systems, from having their own programming is ridiculous. I mean, as I say, the American citizen has bought a set. Let's say he bought a color set, spent $400 or $500, pays several dollars a month for electricity. He has 80 channels in the set. When he finally gets around to realizing that every one of those 80 channels can be hot, in other words, can be giving him material, if he wants it, he's going to scream like nothing you ever heard, and then the whole thing will change in Washington.
In Washington, FCC Chairman Henry denies such pressures are robbing the viewer. He believes, however, there is much about our current system of television, both commercial and educational, that cries out for change.
Ideally, we should make better use of the system. The non-commercial side should have more money. It should be more exciting. It should be more interesting. it should, in my judgment, at some times appeal to more people than it does, and make an attempt to appeal to more people. It's the reverse of the commercial side. On the commercial side, ideally, while it should continue to be an advertising medium and sell soap and automobiles and toothpaste, the managers of the commercial television system should try to make it more of a communications system than an advertising system. At some times during the day, they should communicate, not advertise. It's these pressures of the marketplace that make the medium what it is, and it takes a courageous man with the pressures of Wall Street, of the board of directors, of the need to make profits, to disregard those pressures at various times, and that's what needs to be done.
Bill Greeley of Variety thinks what needs to be done is for sponsors to buy commercials like magazine ads. His solution is
to get them the hell out of programming. They shouldn't make any decisions whatsoever pertaining to programming. Even if they had the hippest showman on earth, if they had P.T. Barnum and I don't know who else rolled up into one, they are men with a special interest which overrides anything they do. They should be taken out of the medium. They should be allowed to buy their minute. They should, I think they should pay twice for it what they're getting. The FCC should rule that they should never look at a rating book. They should look at the cash register. If the minute sold goods for them, they decide, then they can buy more of them. If it didn't, take them out. And these minutes should be rotated so they don't even know on a particular night which show it'll be in.
Bob Hope presents the Chrysler Theater.
the Chrysler Theater is all that is left of regularly scheduled drama on primetime television today. One solution to getting back on the air plays and actors like these, shown in the days when TV nurtured the drama, is now suggested by an ad man, responded to by a network head. The viewer should see to it that they get together.
I think the way to get serious drama on the air is for them to say, we want this, and we think we have an obligation to the public to put it on the air, and we know we have to have it sponsored. We can't afford to run it sustaining year after year, so we'll price this differently from the Beverly Hillbillies or from Get Smart or from the movies. And this way, I think they'd find that there are a lot of advertisers who presently aren't really interested in some of the stuff on the air who might be interested if the costs were reduced.
Maybe we would get good drama on the air if we were to go out and offer it as a particular bargain. And we will experiment with that this coming fall. At this point in time, there has not been a strong demand on the part of advertisers for dramatic programming that we've offered for this coming year or for the recent past, at any price.
What other changes might we look forward to in the broadcast establishment? John Schneider, CBS.
I'm hard-pressed to say that there's something wrong with the status quo. Will it change? Yes, television will change enormously in the next 7-10 years. The changes that will be taking place will grow out of technology. The small miniature color camera will cause programming to look different because we'll be able to go different places with it. Will the stories be any better in drama? I don't know how the stories are going to be any better because I don't think the writers are going to be worse or better. We are going to get the best writers we can to do their very best work, and the best actors and actresses, and comedians, dancers, designers. They're going to do the best they know how. But I don't know what form. I don't know what form that can change. News and informational programming will change. Early Bird will bring us in touch with the world. Early Bird and its sisters of the future. Certainly in 10 years we will have an instant communications capability worldwide. But as to what we are going to say to the world when we have their attention, I'm not certain yet. That's the thing that worries me. We are thinking about it. We have respect for it. I don't have any solution to it quite yet. At least nothing I'd articulate at this time. It's rather frightening, though, to think, well, frightening probably is too strong a word, but I think respect, maybe. We'll be able, maybe, to talk to everybody in the world. Now all we've got to do is decide what we're going to say.
But there are things to say and things to be done now. The responsibility and the shame for what's happening to television is shared by these forces. First, the paradox within the industry itself. The networks and the advertisers who must serve the public and their stockholders. Station and network profits have never been greater, while programming has never been worse. What is required to deal with this paradox was suggested by Chairman Henry.
It takes a courageous man with the pressures of the Wall Street, of the board of directors, of the need to make profit, to disregard those pressures at various times. And that's what needs to be done.
As for Chairman Henry, he should get from Congress a Communications Act with more teeth in it. One that would enable the FCC to license the networks as well as the stations. This would give him more power to force broadcasters to truly serve the public's interest, convenience, and necessity. Next, the level of television criticism must be raised. The few critics who care have already helped bring about some small improvement in news and entertainment specials. But many TV columns are wastelands themselves. They should encourage the medium to innovate, to fall on its face, as it occasionally will, from a loftier height. The audience, too, is responsible for what's happening to television. Thousands of you disgraced yourselves recently when you complained that coverage of a man-in-space emergency interrupted Batman. If TV's usual output is mediocre, those of you who complained are getting precisely what you deserve. However, if you are unhappy with the state of television, do something about it. Turn off the set, read a book, embrace your wife, kiss your child. Then write letters to the sponsors and to Tom Moore, ABC, Mort Werner, NBC, Mike Dan, CBS, and Jack White, NET. Nothing gets faster action than great numbers of people writing in and tuning out. It is urgently clear that educational television must provoke deeper thought and action, and that commercial television must give all the public, not just the mass audience, what it has the right to expect. And that is freedom to choose from the widest possible range of program matter, from experimentation, original drama, news commentary, from fresh comedy, variety, and adventure, from programs that cater to the imagination rather than the ratings. None of this choice will ever appear on our TV screens unless advertisers do get out of programming, unless the FCC is given a stronger hand, unless the viewer does make his needs known, and unless and until the broadcast leadership leads rather than follows what it believes to be majority taste.
At issue is a presentation of the Public Affairs Department of NET.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.